Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today we're going to be taking a look at Curse of the Dead Gods. Now, a few days ago I already did a first impressions on this game. First impressions were really good, and I have to say over the course of the last few days I've been playing it a fair bit, and the thoughts on the game have only been getting better and better. Now, currently the game is still in early access. If you want to wait until it fully releases, then I can totally understand it, but do know that when they add more content to the game, they're also going to be raising the price of the game. So if you're interested in this game, I can already tell right now it's really good. What is there already is just really good right now, so it's only going to get better basically, so you might as well buy it now and then basically save some money for by the time that it fully releases. Now, what is in the game right now is one temple. So the whole premise of this game is that you are exploring a temple. As you progress through the floors of this temple, you get more and more corrupted, and when your corruption meter fills completely, you get cursed, which is why also the name Curse of the Dead Gods. And then as you progress through the dungeon, at certain points you're going to be fighting champions. Once you beat a champion, he can lift one of the curses that you are carrying. So that's kind of how you can get rid of curses as well. Now, there are going to be 3 temples in total. At the moment we only have one, which is the Jaguar Temple. And each temple is going to have its own aesthetic, ambience, traps, enemies, champions, that kind of stuff. Right now, the champions and the boss in the temple all stay the same, so it's not like something like Binding of Isaac or Wizard of Legend where each run that you do, you're going to be fighting different mini-bosses. No, here you have a set amount of enemies that will spawn on every set of floors, and then your champions will also stay the same. So I can pretty much expect that in these 2 new temples that will be coming out in the future, that those will have their own specific set of champions and mini-bosses and enemies and stuff like that as well. Now, the way that the game works, relatively simple. You have a pretty standard but cool combat system where you have a main weapon, you have an offhand weapon, and you also have a two-handed weapon. Now, there are 3 different combat styles, I guess you could call it. You have the first, well, or mode, I guess you could call it. The first one is where you're just walking around with your torch. This is your main way of exploring the dungeon, because light and darkness is actually a pretty cool mechanic in this game, where when you're in the darkness, you literally can't see much other than enemies or something like that. But when you're in the darkness, you can't see stuff like traps, and traps of course deal a decent chunk of damage to you, but they also affect enemies. So what is really cool is that you can light certain torches on fire with your own torch. You can even light enemies on fire, even though I don't think fire damage actually does damage to the enemies. Like, just lighting them on fire doesn't do damage, but it will illuminate the place, and that means that you can find these traps a lot easier. And then of course you can also set those traps on fire, well, certain traps at least, or you can try to push enemies into traps and stuff like that for them to deal damage. So it's a really cool way how you can actually use the environment to your advantage. Sometimes there's like a horde of enemies following you, but you see that there's a barrel bomb or something laying around. Just light the barrel bomb on fire, bait the enemies into it, and then the trap takes care of the enemies for you. And there's even certain relics and stuff like that that will heal you, for example, every time you get a kill with the environment or something like that. And not only that, but there are also cracks in the walls in certain places where you can only go through them if you're able to break the wall. If you want to do it with a weapon, you need a two-handed hammer or a two-handed sword in order to break walls. Stuff like spears, bows, maces and stuff, that doesn't work. Hammers and the two-handed swords do. But if you don't have that weapon, for example, because not every run you're going to come across a hammer or a two-handed sword, you can still use stuff like traps that are there, like for example those barrel bombs, or even certain enemy attacks will be able to break those walls as well. So sometimes you just want to wait with killing an enemy before they use that certain attack that breaks the wall, so that you can open up that path, maybe get a secret chest, some extra gold, or maybe even discover a secret path in the dungeon that will lead to more loot. Usually whenever there's a wall that you can break or a diversion of the path that you can take, then that will usually lead towards bonus loot and stuff like that that you would not have had otherwise. So really cool stuff right there. Now, let's go back to the combat system before I basically just digress way too much. So we have our torch mode, which you can just run around with your torch illuminating the place. You can set stuff on fire with this torch, both stuff in the environment as well as the enemies. You can also hit enemies with this, which does a little bit of damage, but of course if you really want to be dishing out the damage, you want to be using your weapons. Now you have three different weapon types: main hand, offhand, and two-handed. In the second style, or the second form I guess you could call it, you're wielding your main hand as well as your offhand together, meaning that you have quick access to both of the attacks of them, and you can also combine the attacks of them. So for example, if you press main hand offhand attack, you're going to be doing what's called an offhand combo, or an offhand attack. No, actually I think it's called an offhand combo. And what this will do is it will basically chain them together, but you get a different effect depending on which your offhand weapon is. For example, if you're using a pistol, your offhand combo will push enemies away. So this is really useful for pushing enemies into traps, like for example spike traps or something like that. But if you're, for example, using a dagger, your offhand combo becomes a backstab, and you can use this backstab to quickly evade out of attacks. And certain daggers comes with a passive that, using the offhand combo to dodge enemy attacks, you fully restore your stamina, which is a really important resource that you have to manage. And then your two-handed weapons, that's your last kind of combat style, which is basically where you're just wielding your two-handed weapon. Two-handed weapons usually deal a lot more damage, but they're also a lot slower, so it's a little bit of a trade-off right there. You can also usually use them to defense break enemies or make them vulnerable basically. Which can be very useful, as certain other weapon types and relics will also deal bonus damage towards vulnerable enemies and that kind of stuff. So in general, you have your torch, main hand offhand mode, and then your two-handed weapon mode. Now in the gameplay itself, like in the combat, very straightforward. You just press your attack buttons to attack with specific weapons. You have X, Y, and B. If you're using an Xbox controller, X is your normal basic attack, Y is your offhand weapon, and then B is your two-handed weapon, and then A is your torch. Now you also have an evade and a parry. The thing is that you're working with a stamina system. Normally you have 5 stamina. You can get more stamina by picking up certain relics or something like that. And the way how the stamina works is you consume 1 stamina each time you dodge, but if you do a perfect dodge, so if you time it correctly, then you get refunded that stamina. So being able to time your dodges correctly will be important to keeping your stamina high, which is definitely something that you want to do, because stamina is very important. Now, when you're just mashing X or mashing Y, depending on what weapon you have there, you're going to be doing a combo finisher, because normally, like if you just mash X, it's going to do a combo attack, and then when you do the final hit in that combo, it's called a combo finisher. Usually does more damage. Some combo finishers also have special traits to them, like for example making enemies vulnerable, setting them on fire, poisoning them, something like that, or just doing something else entirely. And this will also consume 1 stamina. There are of course weapons that make it so that combo finishers do not consume stamina and stuff like that, but you have to get kind of lucky to find those weapons, of course. Your offhand weapons, as well as your two-handed weapon, will consume 1 stamina per attack, so you can kind of see where this is going. Combo finishers, offhand weapons, and two-handed weapons all consume stamina, and dodging does as well, so it's going to be really important that you don't just deplete all of your stamina swinging around your big hammer, and then all of a sudden be left defenseless against certain attacks because you just can't dodge away. But that's where the parrying comes into play. Parrying is something that I believe you can do against literally every attack in the game if you time it correctly. I've tried it on most of the things. It seems to be working on most attacks, although there are certain attacks that it is really difficult to time against, but that's probably because I just don't have enough experience in the game just yet. But parrying is something that's really good for 2 reasons. First of all, if you parry a melee attack, or for example with the wizards as well, if you stand close enough when you parry their like darkness bolt, whatever it's called, you'll actually be making them vulnerable. So instead of just whacking at an enemy 10 times, you can just wait for them to attack, parry their attack, and then kill them in 5 hits instead of 10 or something like that. Now, not only that, but parrying will also grant you stamina again. So you can be swinging around your axe, wait until the enemy attacks. When you run out of stamina, parry, then get your stamina back so you can swing that big hammer again. So that's something that is really clever that you can do there as well. For example, focusing certain enemies that are hardest to deal with, and then waiting for the easy to parry enemy to attack you to get your stamina back so that you can use your strong hitting attacks again. So I think it's a really cool system right there. There's also certain blessings that you can unlock that will work around this parry system. Like for example, when you parry an attack, all the enemies around you get stunned, or when you parry you get full stamina back or something like that. But not only that, there's also certain weapons that will have passives towards that parry, like for example, reflect 50% of the damage that you just parried or something like that. Cool stuff like that. Really fun combat system. It feels really weighty. It feels kind of like Sekiro in my opinion, but I'm probably gonna offend some people if I make that comparison because you have those parries in there. But a lot of people have been comparing it kind of like as a combination of Dark Souls weightiness of the combat and then Sekiro like parrying, stuff like that. So in my opinion, combat feels really good. There isn't a huge amount of variety on your playstyle, I guess you could say. Like for example with Wizard of Legend, you literally have hundreds of different spells that you can use. In this game there is a few different weapon types that you can have on each different weapon slot, like your main offhand and then your two-handed weapon. But in general, your playstyle is kind of gonna be the same. Like you have a sword, you have a mace, and then you have a claw as your main weapons, for example. But each sword feels the same, each mace feels the same, that kind of stuff. So there isn't a huge amount of variety, but it also doesn't need to be. It just makes it so that the combat system feels very simple, yet involved, because you have that stamina management in place depending on which weapons you pick up. You might not be consuming as much stamina because your combo finishers don't use stamina on certain weapons or something like that. So it just feels very good. Now when it comes to how all of the curse thingies work and that kind of stuff. So each time that you go through the next floor, if you pass through the portal, you're going to be getting 20 corruption. And corruption is something that you can kind of get rid of in certain cases, but in most cases you're basically only going to be getting more and more corruption. So going through the floors is one of the ways that you get corruption. Another way is to heal. Now when you find healing altars, I guess I'll call them, or healing wells, I don't know the exact name of the game, you're basically going to be healing for a percentage of your maximum HP, but you're also going to be taking corruption at the same time. There's also certain curses that replace the gold that you find in certain cups with blood, and then you can drink that blood to heal yourself, but again get corruption at the same time. Also, getting hit by certain enemy attacks will corrupt you too. And then there is also the final way to get more corruption, and that is by paying with blood in the stores. I guess we'll just call them for now. The way the stores work is really cool. So you basically have three options of what you can do with the stores. First of all, you have a selection of 3 different items in said store. This can be relics, can be weapons, can be stats even as well. And the way it works is you basically get to pick and choose one of those 3 choices. Now, if you're not happy with the choices that are there, like for example you want a weapon but they're only giving you main hand weapons and you already have a really good strong main hand, you want something else. So what you can do is you can purchase favors with Crystal Skulls, and Crystal Skulls is a currency that is persistent throughout the whole run, or like throughout the whole gameplay experience, where gold, stats, weapons and stuff like that, they get reset every run. But Crystal Skulls is persistent, and that is what you use in the hub area to buy certain things. So in the hub area you can buy blessings and you can buy favors. Blessings are passive benefits that you just equip at the start of a run to basically give you a head start. Like for example, this can be start a run with 1,000 gold, start a run with bonus HP or something like that. But it can also be other ones, like for example the one that I like running is that all the loot that drops has a high chance to be a higher level of loot, something like that. So a bunch of different blessings that you can get, both from just giving you a kickstart as well as being some more gameplay changing ones as well. And then you also have favors, which favors allow you to re-roll the shops. Now when you're buying favors, each time that you buy the next one it's going to be more expensive. I don't know if there is a cap to favors, I would assume there is. But each time you buy favors it's basically going to be giving you more. For example, I have 3 at the moment, I believe, which means that every run I can re-roll a shop 3 times. Now this currency also resets every run, so if you buy 3, it's not like at the end of each run you'll need to buy 3 favors again. So I think that's a really good thing, because it makes it so that if you find something in the shop that you don't like and it's a shop that you kind of want, like for example weapons or something like that, then you can just re-roll a few times until you do get the weapons that you are looking for, something like that. So all in all, I think it's a really fun and cool experience. Also in these shops, other than re-rolling, you can also choose to pay with either gold or with your blood. So when you buy stuff with gold, of course gold is earned in the dungeon itself. There's also specific rooms that will grant you bonus gold. There's also some kind of a time attack room where the faster you kill it, the more gold you get, and you can get an insane amount of gold from that, as well as certain relics that will work with giving you gold as well, depending on certain scenarios, like for example greed kills, which are combo kills, I guess you could call it. Like basically if you chain kill a bunch of enemies in quick succession, your greed kill counter is gonna go up, and the higher that greed kill counter is, the more gold you're going to be getting for those kills. And then there's of course relics that increase the time it takes for this timer to run out, or that will increase the amount of gold that you get per greed kill or something like that. But also taking damage will, for example, give you gold, or the other way around works as well. Like you take less damage, but each time you take damage you lose that much gold as well. So there's a lot of cool stuff there as well when it comes down to the actual economy of the game. But then when you go to the shop and you see an item that you really want, but you can't pay it because you don't have enough gold, you can still choose to sacrifice blood instead. Now, when it says sacrificing blood, you might be like, oh, I don't want to pay HP in order to get this item, but you don't pay HP, you pay with corruption. So your corruption bar, as I said, whenever it fills, you get a curse, and then the boss can take one curse away from you when you do beat it, of course. But when you don't have enough money to buy something in the shop, instead of paying with a, like for example, let's say 1,000 gold, you could pay instead with 50 corruption. So you just get 50 corruption and then you get the item that you want. So it's kind of a trade-off right there. Do you want to pay with gold and then lose that gold in the process? Or do you want to pay with corruption and then maybe get an extra curse towards the end of the run or something like that? I think it's a really cool thing because it makes it so that in the early game, when you don't have much gold, you can choose to pay with corruption instead, maybe get cursed along the progress, but then at least have a very strong early game or something like that. And then if you make sure that you don't get hit by enemies too much, so that you don't get that bonus corruption, you can just get to the boss and get rid of one of the curses that you don't like. Now, the cool thing about the curses as well is that they're not always bad. Certain curses, or most curses I would have to say, are a double-edged sword. And what I mean by that is that, yes, they are technically always negative and will in generally make the game harder for you. You can also kind of use them to your advantage. For example, one of them will make it so that when an enemy is on fire, when it dies, its corpse will explode. Now, that's of course very dangerous, especially when you're using something like a fire weapon. Certain weapons will set your enemies on fire. But you can also use this to just blow up other enemies, because as I said before, enemies take damage from the environment, and corpses exploding counts as environmental stuff for the game. So when there's a horde of enemies following you, maybe you just take out the weakest enemy with some fire damage, all of a sudden it explodes, and then the other enemies take a bunch of damage or might even die in the process. Also other stuff like, for example, you get increased gold from chests that are around, but you get corruption together with that as well. Or for example, traps are now on a rhythm or something like that, which can be very useful for flying enemies, because certain enemies fly, meaning that they don't trigger spike traps or something. But if the spike traps go off rhythmically, automatically, then of course you can just knock those enemies over those traps, and then you just wait for the trap to activate automatically and stuff like that. So curses are a really cool thing, so it's not always a bad thing to have curses around. They will change the way how you approach certain rooms or the dungeon in general, and you do always gotta be taking care of those curses as well. So sometimes just paying with that corruption, paying with that blood in the store can kind of be a benefit for you as well. And then of course, if you can play well enough that you don't take too many curses, you can just get rid of that curse that you don't want once you beat the champion or something like that. But that's pretty much a rundown of Curse of the Dead Gods, what is available right now. From what I've played so far, I've been enjoying the game a ton. I'm gonna go back in later as well, because I still haven't beaten everything that is to do there in the like the current version of the early access. But so far, definitely can recommend this game. It's kind of like with Hades. I bought into the early access because it just looked so cool, and I definitely have not regretted it so far. I'm just looking forward to all of the other content and the different temples that they are going to be adding in the future, as of course the game is going to be getting more expensive as time goes on. But that's pretty much going to be it for me. Hope you enjoyed it. I want to thank you for watching. I'll leave a link in the description to the Steam page where you can go buy the game if you're interested as well. And I'll see you in the next one.